So I'll call the meeting to order. Before we welcome our guests, I have had discussions with at least one member of each of the parties, and we do obviously anticipate bells very shortly. What I will do at that point is ask for unanimous consent to sit for at least about the first 20 minutes, maybe of the bells or so. What I intend to try and accomplish by doing that is to allow for opening statements and then allow each party a round of questioning, maybe 5 minutes for each party. And what would probably take place is that one or two of those rounds would occur before the vote, and then we would come back after the vote and carry on until either noon or until at least until each party has had a chance to ask one set of questions, one round of questions. Then we would obviously move to our second hour, which is with the Elections Canada officials. I'm also going to suggest at that time that we consider moving our committee business to Thursday, because we're going to be very tight on time, obviously, given the fact that we're compressed as it is, and that we will, of course, have a vote in there. So I will suggest that at that time as well. So as long as there's no objection to that, we'll move on, and when the bells ring, we'll certainly ask for the unanimous consent. I see a number of hands. Mr. Chan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would actually propose if we can just get a couple minutes in on committee business. I know we are pressed for time, but I would like to at least table the government's position with respect to the management of how we deal with committee business on Thursday.
Okay. Well, you know, I don't know what if anyone else has comments on that. I know from my perspective, I know that it was myself, Mr. Christopherson. I think others had raised at the last meeting last week that we felt maybe it would be best to see where we are after Thursday before we would make those determinations. But you know, obviously it's part of the agenda. We'll let members make that decision at that time. Seems like there isn't unanimous feeling on that, so we can have that discussion, I guess, when we get to that point. So maybe what I'll do then is welcome our guests and get us started so that we can at least get through some of the statements prior to having to miss. Okay, so I'll welcome the speaker. I guess you'll start. So the Honourable Jeff Regan is here with us, and we'll let you start, and you can introduce any others who are giving opening statements.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, distinguished guests, as Speaker of the House of Commons. It's a pleasure to be back before this committee to present our main estimates for fiscal year 2017-2018. I'm equally pleased to present the main estimates for the Parliamentary Protective Service, or PPS, which maintains the physical security of the parliamentary precinct and the grounds of Parliament Hill, and reports to me and the Speaker of the Senate on such matters. Je suis accompagné aujourd'hui de Monsieur.
Joining me today is Mr. Mark Bosque, Acting Clerk, and Danielle Paquette, our Chief Financial Officer, and also...
And I do, of course, officially have to receive the unanimous consent to carry. Do I have that consent? Okay, so I do. So sorry for the interruption. We'll let you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. And also I have with me Mr. Mike O'Byrne, who is the Acting Director of the PPS, and Robert Graham, Administration and Personnel Officer.
Key elements of the 2017-18 main estimates for the House of Commons, which total $476 million and represent a 2.7% increase over the previous year. The presentation of the mains for PPS will follow. Pour vous aider à suivre la première...
To help guide the first part of my presentation and to facilitate our exchanges, I have provided a handout that outlines each of the 14 line items included in the House of Commons 2017-18 main estimates. I will address each of these in the order in which they appear, leaving, I hope, ample time for our discussion. I hope. As you note, there are 9 items included under the broad category of members, House officers, and committees, associations and exchanges, 4 items under House Administration, and last but not least, a final item related to employee benefit plans.
That increase to the member's office budget and House officers' budgets. Together, this represents a permanent increase of $2.8 million, with the greatest proportion being allotted to the members' office budgets. Comme vous le savez, ces budgets permettent.
As you know, these budgets give members of Parliament and House officers the resources that they need to carry out their parliamentary functions on behalf of Canadians. The adjustments were calculated based on the Consumer Price Index as measured in September 2016. They were scheduled to take effect on April the 1st.
The MOB supplements, which totals $1.5 million, has also been sought. The supplement assists members who represent constituencies that are densely populated, geographically large, or remote in responding to the needs of the people they represent. La liste électorale qui nous utilisons.
The electoral list, which we use to calculate the amount of the elector supplement, was revised and published by Elections Canada in February 2016. That occurred after the submission deadline for the main estimates in 2016-2017. The result was this. The revised list of electors required an adjustment that had to be applied to the supplement, resulting in a decrease of 308,000 in 2017-18 and in subsequent years.
Inherent in serving larger, more populated or more remote constituencies, which members I think will understand. They help to level the playing field to ensure that Canadians are well served by their members of Parliament. The increase to the supplements was made during the 2016-2017 year and took effect on April 1st, 2016. À cette date également, les indemnités.
Also on that date, member sessional allowances and additional salaries increased by 1.8%. This amount reflects adjustments that were made every year on April 1st based on the average increase in Canadian wages resulting from major settlements in the private sector. The adjustment represents a permanent increase of $1.1 million for 2016-17.
Funding adjustment to the travel status expenses account for 2013-14 and 2015-16 in the amount of $743,000. Specifically, this increase equals the total amounts approved over a 4-year period by the Board of Internal Economy, but not yet reflected in the main estimates. The increase will ensure that in the future, funding in the mains and approved allocations will correspond. J'attire maintenant votre attention sur les.
Let me now draw your attention to the next 4 line items related to parliamentary associations and conferences. First, a bit of context. As you may know, funding for these items is shared between the House of Commons and the Senate. As such, the amounts to which I will refer in a moment represent the 70% portion of the total budget which the House of Commons funds. The remaining 30% is paid by the Senate.
In parliamentarians to further engage internationally. It's something that I hear about often from foreign delegations and ambassadors and high commissioners who come to see me. Well, this pressure has been building for some time. It has recently become more prevalent. Le financement alloué à ce travail important est demeuré.
Funding for this important work remained relatively stable for several years. However, a significant decrease in 2013, coupled with increases in association membership fees and other costs, including travel, hampered association activities.
Many of whom wish to play a role in the 12 parliamentary associations that support Canada's international efforts. For all of these reasons, the Board recently accepted a recommendation from the Joint Interparliamentary Council to increase its share of permanent funding to Canada's parliamentary associations by $700,000. De même, le Canada.
Likewise, Canada will play host to the Interparliamentary Union's Global Conference of Young Parliamentarians in November. To support the conference, which brings the bright and the brightest young parliamentarians together to address pressing challenges to our democracies around the world, temporary funding of $324,000 has been sought. The Parliament of Canada will also host two significant conferences in the second half of 2018.
NATO Parliamentary Assembly will take place in my hometown of Halifax in November of 2018. MPs from across the Atlantic Alliance will gather to discuss important matters related to security. To support early preparations for this important event, $72,000 in temporary funding has been sought in fiscal year 2017-18. Also next year in July, the 56th Regional Commonwealth Parliamentary Association Conference will come to Ottawa. They'll probably have almost as good a time as they would if they were in Halifax. The conference will gather parliamentarians from across the Commonwealth to promote cooperation and good governance. To help host this event, $19,000 in temporary funding for 2017-18 has also been sought. Je crois que je parle au nom de bonnes.
I think that I speak for many around the table today in saying that we look forward to the result of the work of our parliamentary associations over the next 12 months and also in the future. Let me now turn to the group of items listed under the general category of House of Commons administration. As you know, the administration plays a crucial role in supporting the work of each and every member of Parliament, as well as that of our institution, including helping to ensure our collective security in partnership with the Parliamentary Protective Service.
In English, it is responsible for security in the House of Commons chamber, providing project management for security infrastructure, conducting investigations, coordinating visitor and event access, providing security accreditation, promoting security awareness, and administering parking services. De plus, le BSI est...
The Corporate Security Office also develops and implements house-wide security policies, standards, and processes aimed at preventing, detecting, and responding to security risks and to threats. Since the 2015 launch of the Integrated Security Model in partnership with the Parliamentary Protective Services, or PPS, our understanding of the roles and responsibilities shared by the CSO and PPS have evolved.
Security, a permanent increase of $3.6 million to the CSO budget was sought, in addition to a temporary increase of $69,000 in 2017-18. This temporary funding will help to pay for additional staff and office space. It's worth noting that security enhancement measures identified in 2016-17 and presented the last time that I appeared before you are either underway or being completed, so we are on track with those. The Chambre des communes et son
The House of Commons and its partner, Public Services and Procurement Canada, the PSPC, are also on track with the renovations and rehabilitation projects underway throughout the parliamentary precinct. To that end, we have sought an increase of $2.4 million in temporary funding to maintain and, in the longer term, to replace crucial information technology assets, to transfer the building components and connectivity program from PSPC to the House of Commons, and also to better meet those building requirements that are specific to our institution.
Where top students from across Canada have the opportunity to support the work of the House and witnessed the legislative process firsthand accounts for a permanent aggregate increase of $60,000 beginning this year. That increase is calculated on the basis of the average increase in tuition and residence fees at Carleton University and the University of Ottawa and is reviewed every year. While we're on the topic of the PAGE program, I'd like to take a moment to say how very satisfying it was to learn that the House Administration had been recognized as an exceptional workplace for young Canadian talent in this year's Top 100 Employers national competition, as well as being named a top or the top employer in the region. A top employer, excuse me, darn it, just A, but that's still good. Of course, we've always known this, but this year's public endorsement by the Top 100 Employers project was indeed a welcome one. Autre fait saillant, l'ouverture de l'édifice Sir John.
Another highlight is the opening of the Sir John A. Macdonald Building, or SJAM, as we like to affectionately call it, and more recently the Wellington Building, which resulted in a decrease of 99,000. I say 99,000 to our main estimates for this year. The amount represents previously approved and temporary funding that paid for non-recurring costs associated with the renovation and rehabilitation phases of these very successful buildings, and it is now a project that is completed.
For the House of Commons, but first, let me quickly turn my attention to the main estimates for the Parliamentary Protective Service, Mr. Chairman. I'll begin by providing you with an overview of the PPS's main estimates request for 2017-18, which totals $68.2 million. This includes a voted budget component of $62.1 million and a $6.1 million statutory budget requirement for the Employee Benefits Program. This 2017-18 main estimates request represents a $5.8 million increase from the PPS's 2016-17 main estimate submission. En plus du budget permanent voté,
En plus du budget permanent.
In addition to PPS's permanent voted budget of $56.3 million, which was approved under the 2016-17 main estimates and established as a result of Bill C-59, PPS is seeking an additional $5.8 million in permanent funding to support the ongoing implementation of security enhancements and to further stabilize the organizational structure.
Several reviews concerning or surrounding this incident were conducted, resulting 161 recommendations on improving security on Parliament Hill. The PPS received funding approval in September 2016 to launch the PPS Mobile Response Team initiative. La mise en œuvre de cette initiative adressera.
The implementation of this initiative will address a significant number of these 161 recommendations and will enhance PPS's overall response capacity. PPS is requesting permanent funding in the amount of $1.2 million to further implement and sustain the needs of this initiative.
Approved security enhancement initiatives. Additional funding in the amount of $787,000 will be transferred to the PPS, given its direct alignment with the PPS's mandate. PPS is also seeking permanent funding in the amount of $3 million to stabilize the protective posture in the newly opened 180 Wellington Building and to uphold three existing third-party security agreements throughout the precinct. Compte tenu de l'augmentation prévisible.
Given the anticipated increase in visitors for the precinct and the grounds of Parliament Hill throughout Canada's 150th anniversary celebrations, a total of $400,000 is required in temporary funding to support the costs of the baggage screening facility at 90 Wellington through 2017-2018. This renewed temporary funding request will not only enhance the visitor experience, but it will also enable PPS to evaluate the facility's effectiveness, its feasibility, and its long-term sustainability.
$1 million for previously approved and new security enhancement initiatives throughout the parliamentary precinct and the grounds of Parliament Hill. In addition to the aforementioned operational enhancement initiatives funding request, the PPS is seeking a permanent increase of $886,000 to fund a series of corporate service requirements. This includes the funding for full-time communications resources to support PPS's internal and external messaging, along with the funding necessary to fulfill the existing service level agreements with the House Administration for the provision of human resource and information and technology service. L'SPP demeure résolu.
The PPS remains committed to operational excellence through the provision of professional physical security services throughout the parliamentary precinct and the grounds of Parliament Hill.
Effectiveness of its service delivery model, the PPS will focus on the ongoing implementation of existing and new resource optimization initiatives, the identification of opportunities to leverage innovation, and a strengthened commitment to collaboration with its various parliamentary partners. Voilà qui conclut ma présentation.
This then concludes my presentation.
The length of the presentation, which we appreciated, by the way, was comprehensive. But given our tight time frame, I think what I am going to do is, rather than go into the rounds of questioning now, I think we would start to push our luck a little bit to do that. So I'm going to leave the rounds of questioning for following the vote. That will mean there'll be about 15 minutes there, with 5 minutes for each party. So what I'll ask is our guests either to remain or to return as soon as the votes end. I know some of you, of course, have duties, as we do, to be there. And we'll pick up and I'll ask all members as well to arrive here as quickly as possible. We'll pick up as quickly as we can. However, that will probably require us to extend this a little bit past noon. I understand, Mr. Speaker, that is possible for you to remain for just a few minutes following noon. And then what we would have to do, of course, is start with the Elections Canada officials. I would ask my Liberal friends to reconsider the idea of moving the committee business till Thursday, because we'll be very tight on time with the Elections Canada officials if not. And if that's not something that we can get consent for, well, we will have to end that round of questioning. I'll just make the questioning accordingly. You can speak to me before or after the votes and let me know if that's something that's possible, and we'll adjust the rounds of questioning according to what that decision is. So at this point in time, well, I'll recognize Mr. Reid, but if you can make it very brief, Mr. Reid, because I don't want to push our luck.
To echo your point, on behalf of the opposition, I would request that we move the scheduling issues to Thursday. It will be very hard to have proper, fulsome questioning of the acting CEO if we don't do that.
Thank you for that. And what I will now do is suspend the meeting briefly, and we will be back after the votes as quickly as possible. Meeting suspended. So we'll call the meeting back to order. So welcome back, everyone. What we will do now is we'll go into the rounds of questioning with the speaker before we move to our elections officials. So what I'm going to do is, as I said earlier, is that each party will get a 5-minute round of questioning with the speaker and the other officials. So we'll start with the Liberal Party, Mr. Graham.
Thank you. Thank you, Speaker, for joining us for the bells and your excellent summary and your explanation of these estimates. And that does help translate them all to English. The PAGE program is indeed exceptional. You may recall that my daughter very briefly joined it at Halloween last year. I dressed her up. But to nobody's surprise, my questions will mainly be to Superintendent O'Byrne. So I'll put it this way. We've noticed a change in our colleagues' uniforms recently with the addition of the hats and these respect stickers that we've been seeing. I'm wondering if you could describe your relationship with the PPS unions and when we can expect to see a resolution to the very obvious dispute that's currently taking place.
Mr. O'Byrne, over to you, Superintendent.
Thank you. I guess, Mr. Graham, I'll start by saying that at the PPS, truly our strength is our people. The bringing together of the 3 separate entities upon the creation of the PPS brought together corporate knowledge, experience that none of that is lost on us, and we've been factoring all that into on every step that we take moving forward as an entity. I guess to your specific question, I guess what I can say is this: is that, as you know, the creation of the PPS brought together currently we have 3 collective bargaining units: the SPSEA, the SSEA, and PSAC. So since the creation of the PPS, we have believed that it would be best for operations and our concept of operation and employees if there was a single bargaining unit, as it supports our objectives of effectively unifying all the personnel, again, for the service, but under one operational umbrella towards a common goal. So the associations, I guess, have a different perspective, and it's certainly their right to do so. And they've articulated that they prefer 2 bargaining units. In accordance with the law that actually created the PPS and the associations have each submitted a request to the PSLE REB as to what that right number would be. Again, we have currently 3. So with this, we've been respectfully waiting for a decision, and we look forward to that decision, hopefully in the coming months. Now, in regards to specifically, the issues that you've brought up, there's been some question about that the positions at the PPS will not meet with the associations. It's from our perspective, the PPS would prefer to continue meeting with all 3 of the bargaining units as we share common interests and common goals. In the past, not all bargaining units have agreed to this approach, and we've had varying degrees of success in having attendance at some of the joint meetings that have been scheduled by the PPS. We do understand that some have a view that they would prefer to meet individually. It's very complex to accommodate at all times. For example, we often deal with the exact same issue, but then have to hold 3 different meetings with the 3 different associations to discuss the very same issue. I can assure you, though, that as I mentioned, that the PPS, our strength is our people, and that's not lost on that. That's not lost on us. We do continue to communicate with them at every possible turn, whether it's directly with the associations or directly with our PPS personnel. And I guess I can close perhaps by letting you know that, again, further to the views that we're not communicating, there's also a view that the PPS will not enter into a collective bargaining. So I guess specifically to the stickers question, I guess I'll answer from this perspective. The SSEA's collective agreement has indeed expired, and they've requested that we enter into collective negotiations. Now, the legal opinion that the PPS has received, we've been informed that we cannot start these negotiations or negotiations of any kind with any of the bargaining units until the Labour Board decides on the actual number of bargaining units in their view that would be appropriate. So again, the legal opinion that the PPS has received differs than that of the SSCA's legal opinion. And I guess to that end, I'll say that it's not a question of strategy, or it's not a question of tactics, but rather simply a question of what we understand to be legal. Because of the difference of opinions, we've asked the Labour Board to render a decision on whether or not we should bargain in the current environment. And we, again, anxiously await the decisions of the PSLRB on that.
Much. Time has expired on this round. I didn't mention, so I did allow it to go just a few seconds over, but I'm going to be very strict about the times with these because of the compressed schedule we have today. And I will just remind members before I move to our next round of questioning that the use of props, as is in the chamber, is not to be permitted in committee rooms as well. So just I'll remind members of that. So I will move now to Mr. Schmale for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and I will set my timer, so I will be adhere to your times. Thank you very much, Speaker, and the rest. Appreciate you taking the time. I'd like to direct my questions, if I could, to Superintendent O'Byrne, if I could. In terms of the PPS, how many vacancies do you have currently in terms of personnel on the floor?
Well, perhaps I'll turn it over to in a moment to Mr. Graham here that can perhaps clarify the numbers. But as you know, there was a change in posture following the October 22nd incident in 2014. Since the creation of the PPS, we've been working hard with our partners to find that right number, where we're continuing to work alongside our partners in gaining a better understanding of the LTVP projects, the opening, the closings of the buildings, to again find that proper number. I know that it's not lost on us that our folks are working hard towards a common goal. In regards to finding some respite in the short term, I can tell you that we have a class of graduating recruits, PPS members that just graduated yesterday, and we have another class that's graduating at the kind of the middle of June. That'll bring some greatly needed support. We're anticipating that'll bring the total of about 40 members. As the Speaker put forth in the mains, we received funding for 45 more positions at 180 Wellington. So these are all steps that are positioning us for future successes. Perhaps I can turn over to Mr. Graham for some more analysis.
Yeah, I want to make sure and come back with the facts. We're coming back on Thursday. I can bring you the specific number back on Thursday. But as Superintendent O'Byrne said, we have some vacancies that we've been filling, and we had a new class of recruits that started just this week, and we're happy to have them on board. But we'll get that number back to you on Thursday.
Do you feel these vacancies are, and I first apologize if I cut you off, it's all respect, it's just I have 3 minutes left and a lot of questions. Do you feel that you're filling these vacancies quick enough? Because from what I'm hearing, there is a lot of people doing a lot of forced overtime, and these vacancies aren't being filled quick enough in order to anticipate the demand that you have here.
So I guess I can speak. Our recruiting, hiring, and training cycle is approximately 8 months. So we do have to really lean forward and really anticipate future needs. As I mentioned, we're very, we're trying to be as nimble as possible in response to future needs. We have an attrition rate as well that we're always mindful of. I guess, to your point about overtime, perhaps I can draw it to my earlier comments about the 3 separate bargaining units that we do have. There are some limitations that we have to work within in regards to these three, two associations and one union that we have to be mindful of. So there's a few constraints and restraints that we're currently operating in. in this environment.
Okay. I'm sorry if I bounce around a lot. I have maybe a minute left, and I have a lot of questions, so I do apologize. I'll bounce around a bit. I just want to confirm I just want to ask and confirm with you some of the additional dollars we're looking at in funding. I want to confirm whether it be the $5.8 million in permanent funding. I want to confirm that the plan is to make a priority into operations rather than administration. To me, putting people on the ground instead of into administration is where this money will be going. Can you confirm that that is being a priority? I guess for lack of time, I guess.
And then there is about 30 seconds to answer that.
It is a priority, and we're putting that forward for consideration. As you know, in the interest of time here, PPS was created with the frontline members that were brought together. We're working hard again to find to create the corporate side of the house to do the heavy lifting behind the scenes. Mr. Graham?
Yes, the purpose of the administrative functions is to hire the people necessary to manage to support operations and provide the agility and nimbleness necessary to provide operations the resources that they need.
Sorry, Mr. Schmale, your actually time has expired. Monsieur Dussault.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to our colleagues who are appearing today. I will ask my first question to Mr. O'Byrne. I have a very simple question. Who is your boss, Mr. O'Byrne? Who do you answer to? After the changes to the Parliament of Canada Act, that created the PPS. I can tell you that further to that, there was an MOU that was created, which puts me under the direction of the Speaker of the House of Commons and the Speaker of the Senate. All aspects concerning security on Parliament Hill, concerning policy, concerning any aspect, quite frankly, of security on Parliament Hill. And operationally speaking, I also answer to the Commissioner of the RCMP. So you have two instances, two places where you have to be responsible. The Commissioner of the RCMP plus the speakers. To the Speaker, with this new arrangement, has the relationship improved? Is there more understanding with respect to the RCMP as to how the House of Commons and Senate function? What has happened since the changes effected in 2014? I would like to thank the honourable member for his question. The administration of the House of Commons has very good relations with Superintendent O'Byrne, the director of the PPS, and generally speaking, relationships are assessed and we work together to get to know each other better. As you know, the administration does not have the same aspects as the PPS and the other institution, but things are working out very well. Well, my next question to the Speaker or to Mr. O'Byrne, but you did say when you appeared before the committee recently that there were services that were supplied by the RCMP that would be provided by the PPS, that you were going through a transition period, and that would have an effect on the budget, on the estimates. So have the services now moved from the RCMP to the PPS, and is that reflected in the estimates today? Further to the creation of the PPS, yes, there was transitional support from the RCMP, and there were human resources that were put in place to facilitate the transfer. Those positions are critical for the continuation and continuity of the transfer to the PPS in terms of the corporation, and we must solidify them for the future. In the main estimates, we see an increase for personnel 2016-2017 from 39 million to some 50 million rather dollars. So can you tell me if the $6 million that also appears in that item is going to be attached to the bargaining units that could be set up for employees? Does the $6 million represent more hiring? What does the $6 million represent under the personnel heading? Give me 20 seconds. What are you asking? You want to clarify the 2016-2017 budget? Yes, the move from 39 million to some 40 million. 45 million. Which creates a disparity of $6 million. So you're asking me to analyze the $6 million disparity from 2016-2017? Well, how do you justify that increase in that budget? Well, if you're talking about the request for 2017-2018 that we are making today, I can set that out. It was presented this morning. That would be the MRT team initiative for the Senate, operational resources for 180 Wellington, and the security contract for 90 Wellington, and also a communications specialist and agreements that the PPS has with the Senate and the House of Commons in terms of structure, support service, human resources, and so on, compensation. So okay.
Yeah, before I, so what we will do is we'll thank our guests that are here with us now, the speaker and the clerk and others. Thank you all for being here. And I see we do have a member who would like to say something briefly, Mr. Chan, before I suspend the meeting to bring forward the next set of witnesses here from Elections Canada. Maybe have you reconsidered the idea of
No, I just wanted, first I want to thank our guests for appearing and explaining today's estimates. I just wanted your direction, Chair, whether to move the appropriate motion with respect to the adoption of the main estimates for the House of Commons and the Parliamentary Protective Service now or at the end of the meeting?
My intention is to conduct all the votes at the conclusion of the other panel. So thank you. Now, so I'll suspend briefly to allow the change of witnesses. Thank you. So I'll call the meeting back to order. So now we have, I have a point of order. Mr. Reid?
We are starting 10 minutes late. If we take a further 10 minutes at the end to deal with the item of committee business going camera, we are going to have very, very limited time to deal with Elections Canada. Therefore, I would request, in fact, I guess I would move that we change some motion, that we move, I move that we simply deal with Elections Canada until the end of the meeting, leaving enough time for votes on the estimates for Elections Canada and the House of Commons.
Well, thank you, Mr. Reid. Now, because it was on a point of order, of course, I cannot entertain your motion. However, it was something that I did intend to raise myself. I had mentioned it earlier. I know that it seemed as though the Liberal Party was the one that seemed to disagree with the idea of moving that time to Thursday. Maybe they have had a chance to have discussion. Is that something you've reconsidered? Do you still feel it's absolutely necessary? Because I will point out we are down to, we would be left with 37 minutes at this point with the elections officials if we were to have committee business today.
2 minutes.
Okay.
Just to get my point. I mean,
Sorry,
at the end of it, we decided as a group.
So sorry, I have Ms. Sahota had her hand up first.
Thing. We're spending lots of minutes talking about this back and forth, but maybe we can condense the time from 10 to 2 minutes, and that way we can still save time and move on right now to Elections Canada.
How does other parties feel about 2 minutes?
We come back at 2 minutes to 1, then I'm fine with that.
Okay. Well, that's what we will do then. Rather than waste any further time, we'll get started. We have with us, of course, the Acting Chief Electoral Officer, Stéphane Perreault. We also have Michelle Roussel, the Deputy Chief Electoral Officer, and Hugh St. Pierre, the Deputy Chief Electoral Officer for Internal Services as well. Mr. Perreault, I assume you have some opening remarks. If so, I'll let you have the floor to deliver those, and then I'll determine in the meantime what we can do for rounds of questioning prior to the need for our committee business. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to appear today and discuss Elections Canada's main estimates for 2017-2018. Before I start, I do want to thank the chair and the members of this committee for the work that you have done in reviewing the CEO's recommendations and for reporting on those recommendations. And of course, Elections Canada staff remains available to assist the committee in this regard. Aujourd'hui, le comité se penche et se prononcera sur le crédit annuel.
Today, the committee is studying and voting on Elections Canada's annual appearance, which is its appropriation, which is $29.9 million. This represents the salaries of approximately 350 indeterminate positions. Combined with the statutory authority which funds all other expenditures under the Canada Elections Act, our 2017-18 main estimates totals $112.2 million. During the fiscal year, Elections Canada is working on specific administrative changes to modernize the electoral process to address problems raised in the Canadian system during recent elections. I will like to mention 3 of them: voting services, voter registration services, and online services for candidates and political entities. On voting services, I can tell you that I was pleased that this committee agreed to the CEO's recommendations that would go forward and allow for its implementation. We look forward to the government's response. In major urban centres, wait time is often an issue. for voters, especially at advanced polls. In other places, a new voting services model would allow voters to vote at any available table with their polling location, thereby reducing wait times. The new process will also improve working conditions, allowing for pauses for workers there to take breaks without interrupting the vote. Now, to implement the new model, electoral workers will be equipped with electronic poll books. They have applications that will be able to run on tablets or laptops to help election workers manage the voters' lists by using a stylus or something like that. It should also significantly reduce record-keeping errors, improve compliance with procedures, and increase accountability. I wish to stress that we will retain all paper ballots, which will continue to be marked and counted by hand. We are currently mapping out scenarios for deploying this new voting services model for the 2019 general election, focusing on electoral districts where deployment would bring the most benefit. Deployment decisions will also be informed by procurement policies currently in progress and input from the Advisors Committee of political parties. In more sparsely populated areas, travel time to voting locations rather than wait time was one of the main problems reported by Canadians in recent elections. In those areas, instead of introducing technology, we will increase the number of advanced polling locations to improve proximity. As well, we will provide returning officers with routing data to support the selection of voting locations. This will help ensure that voters are directed to the closest polling location. Since the preparation of our departmental plan, we have decided to set aside one project, one aspect of it, the electronic delivery of special ballots. While we continue to believe that legislation should be amended to provide flexibility in the delivery of special ballots, this is not something we will be pursuing for 2019. However, based on the success of the pilot project conducted at some post-secondary institutions in 2015, we will increase the number of satellite local offices. These offices will provide information, registration, and opportunities for voters away from their electoral district. They will vote by special ballot.
Coverage and currency of the National Register of Electors, especially with respect to young voters. For instance, only 1/4, to be precise, 27% of 18-year-olds are registered, compared to just over 70% for 20-year-olds. I would note that our recommendation to pre-register 16 and 17-year-olds, as well as to gain access to data from Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada on non-citizens, would also improve the coverage and the currency of the National Register of Electors. These measures are also included in Bill C-33. In addition, we are working to make online voter registration services more universally accessible, particularly for voters in rural and remote areas who do not have standardized residential addresses and who had trouble using the e-registration function at the last election. We will also offer an online portal providing a number of services to candidates and political entities. This will include the ability, with proper authentication, to download various documents such as maps and voters lists, or to file electronically documents such as nomination papers. I do note that this committee supported the recommendations that will facilitate the electronic filing of documents, of nomination papers in its review of the CEO's report. In moving forward with improvements to our service offering, we will continue to consult with parliamentarians, including this committee, as well as with key stakeholders. I would note, Mr. Chair, that we traditionally have an informal meeting session in the fall, usually in early September or October when Parliament comes back, and I would hope that we will have this opportunity next September to look at the deployment options for a new technology at the polls. Elections Canada is also in the process of replacing and improving a number of existing systems and services that enable the delivery of modern elections. For the next general election, these include new telecommunication services for local offices, as well as our central contact centres. This also includes upgrades and maintenance to our IT network and the progressive implementation of a new solution for hosting our data centers. Upgrades and additional basic functionalities are also required for the system that supports returning officers and the hiring, training, and paying of some 300,000 poll workers at a general election. These investments will allow Elections Canada to ensure that our IT services remain reliable and secure in this changing environment. We are working with lead security agencies and in particular the Communications Security Establishment of Canada to ensure that our infrastructure continues to meet all appropriate security standards and requirements. Lastly, I would like to touch briefly on the timing of legislation. I understand that in addition to Bill C-33, the Minister intends to introduce legislation related to fundraising activities in the coming weeks. She also indicated before this committee that she intends to introduce other legislative changes in the fall of 2017, building on the CO's recommendations. The Minister recognized, the last time she appeared before this committee, that Elections Canada needs sufficient time to implement the changes well ahead of the 2019 general election. In this regard, assuming that enabling legislation is enacted by the spring of 2018, this should allow us time to implement our proposed new voting services model and other legislative changes for the next general election. To conclude, Mr. Chair, we look forward to the final report from this committee on the review of the CO's recommendations for improved administration of the Canada Elections Act, and as I indicated at the outset, Elections Canada staff remains available to assist the committee in this regard. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and my colleagues and I would be happy to answer any question of the members of this committee.
Great, thank you, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of those. What I've decided we'll do is with the first round, we'll go with 5-minute rounds, and then as we get close to the end of the first round, I can determine what we have left for time to conduct some part of a second round of questioning. So we'll start with the 5-minute rounds with Mr. Sims.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the last election, I come from a rural angle, and I found in the past 2 elections, and the biggest benefits for people voting, you'll find that increasingly so, especially with the onset of the oil gas industry way back when. I know it's in a downturn now, but still very important to a lot of rural areas. The idea, when I first started in 2004 to vote, you do a special ballot. What is actually more beneficial is having the electoral office open and able to vote for the duration of the writ period. That has been a huge increase, I think, in participation, or certainly allowed a lot of people to participate. So the only problem was there weren't as many offices where that was available. Is it possible that you could expand that number within one riding? And is it also possible that you could expand that service and keep it for campuses?
Absolutely, that is precisely our plan. That is part of the feedback that we also received. And so by having satellite offices in addition to the main returning office, we can offer for the duration of the campaign voting opportunities by special ballot, whether for people who are within the riding or whether it is for people who are living outside this riding but happen to be there. The voting will be available for all voters, not just at the returning office, but at additional satellite offices, very much in the same way that we did for post-secondary institutions as a pilot for the last election. We're looking to expand this.
Okay. I don't have a lot of time. I have 5 minutes, but I want to expand on that. But I think that'll suffice, and it's nice to hear that. I just wanted to give you my feedback as well, and it has gone a long way. The electronic aspect of it, obviously, for candidates, a portal for candidates. At what stage are you now with that? Because that could certainly go a long way when it comes to downloading materials as opposed to picking up the actual paper copy.
To be quite frank with this committee, we are at early stages, but we plan to engage the Advisory Committee of Political Parties in late June with various options of this proposal.
Okay, thank you. Just switching gears for a moment, have you, what progress have you made when it comes to the expansion now of people who can vote internationally? Like they were able to go to certain embassies or offices of that nature. are we going to make any changes for the next election? Do you see any changes to help people, to help facilitate their vote in other nations?
There certainly will need to be changes depending on the fate of Bill C-33 in our outreach and using social media. That's something that we will need to expand. In terms of the delivery of ballots, people abroad will continue to be able to download ballot kits if they've pre-registered, download application forms, but not the ballot kits. This was an initiative that we had been looking at to deliver electronically the ballot kit, but we will not be pursuing that for 2019.
I see, because I think, personally, I obviously you feel the same way. That would go a long way towards that, because if you're looking at any particular nation, then obviously if you're in a rural area in a foreign nation, it's incredibly difficult. And hopefully the pending legislation will help make it that much easier. But of course, you're also broadening the amount of people that are eligible to vote. So I hope that moves through. Finally, I want to talk about. One of the things that is problematic is about the identification of certain voters, and certainly in my riding, there are a lot of elderly people who do not have the right identification. Have you ever, and this is me speaking now, have you ever explored the idea that in some provinces, and I think in Newfoundland and Labrador you can do this, where a person in the polling booth designated as an elections official can verify the identity and do that on multiple occasions for people that they know. It's basically, they come in and they say, I'd like to vote, and they say, you can't, but you've known me for 30 years. Sorry, so you still can't vote. I think that's my concern, and have you addressed that in any which way, shape, or form?
I do agree that it's a significant concern. That's particularly offensive when you're in a senior's home, which you've done some targeted revision, and you've met them, a week before, and they come to vote, and they have to prove to you again that who they are and where they reside, and you're right there in the lobby of the senior's home. So we have recommendations in the CEO's recommendations report. There are a number of recommendations to deal with it. One of them, of course, is the issue of using the VIC as proof of address in combination with another piece of document. Another recommendation is to allow, in certain circumstances, one person to vouch for more than one person. And we've seen this in care facilities, where the nurse is allowed to vouch if she or he resides in the district, can only vouch for one person but cannot vouch for the others in the long-term care facility. So there should be some flexibility in the legislation to deal with these very special circumstances where really there is no concern about the residence of these people.
But outside of... Oh. Thank you, Chair.
Your time has expired. We'll move now to Mr. Reid for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here, Mr. Perreault. Mr. Perreault, I wanted to ask you a question regarding Elections Canada's legal expenses. In 2009 to 2012, Elections Canada was involved in litigation in a case that was formally titled Callahan versus Chief Electoral Officer, also known as the In-N-Out case. On several occasions, this committee asked the then CEO, Mr. Méran, how much had been spent on that case. I've gone through the different reports, and although the case concluded in 2012, the most recent report we had from Mr. Méran actually dates from October the 10th or October the 7th, 2010, when he said to us in response to a question from one of my colleagues, quote, I think the last time we reported $1.3 million to the committee, and I think there have been some increases of around $300,000 since that time, end quote. So a further year and a half went by before it wrapped up. Do you have the final cost for that case?
I do not have the final cost with me. I'd be happy to provide them. I understand, Mr. Chair, that the question relates to the Callaghan case, which is the federal court case, not any investigation in relation to the similar facts, but simply the federal court case. And I would be happy to provide the committee with those final numbers.
Yeah, would want to provide that through the clerk and
absolutely. Yes, I don't have those numbers.
No, that's fair enough. I wouldn't expect you to come equipped with those off the top of your head. Although I would have been impressed if you had. But anyway, thank you for that. Well, I asked that question for a reason. The legal costs of the Conservative Party at that time were also well over $1 million. I've heard as high as $2 million, and I do know that it was the second highest ongoing expenditure in the inter-election period when the Conservative Party finally gave up the battle and decided to abandon the case. At that time, only about $300,000 was actually being contested. Elections Canada, or the commissioner as it may be, had lowered the amount that was in contest to a point where it was significantly below the actual amount then being litigated. But had it been necessary to go through that very expensive litigation in order to get that number driven down, the claim about how much the party was illegally claiming down to a $300,000 level. Now, I raise this for the following reason. At that time, it was never clear to me, had I and others tried to assist in paying the Conservative Party's legal costs, whether Elections Canada would have taken the position that we were making an illegal contribution to the party, or whether they would have said that's a legitimate exercise of a citizen's right to assist another group with a legal matter. If the latter position would have been taken, then that would have been, from my point of view, fine. If the former position, then effectively Elections Canada would have been taking the position, I think unintentionally, but this would have been the logical consequence, that Elections Canada can, through its prosecution of fundraising activities, drive any party into bankruptcy simply by pursuing the enormous costs associated with litigation. So let me ask the question now. Should such a situation arise in the future, either with the Conservative Party or any other party, would it be your position that making private citizens making contributions to the legal expenses associated with a matter of this sort would or would not be an unlawful contribution to the party?
So as the law now stands, any amount of money provided that is not reimbursable to a political party is a contribution under the Act. I do note that in the CO's recommendations, there is a recommendation, not for parties, but for candidates, to look at exceptions when there is a dispute regarding the campaign, so that financial assistance for the cost of litigation may be outside the limits that are currently in the Act in terms of expenses. But that recommendation does not deal with political parties.
Thank you. Just so to assist us, would you be able to draw the clerk's attention to that particular? It's a recommendation that I gather Elections Canada has made. Would you draw the attention to the clerk so we could provide it to all of us? It doesn't happen right now. It could happen at any time in the future.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
You have about 30 seconds, Mr. Reid.
I'll go to the next round. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. We'll then move to Mr. Dussault for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. My question is this. It deals with what was said in 2016, 2017, when you or Mr. Méran, I don't know which of you said it, but it was said that the audit of the refunds for candidates was to end in August 2017 at the latest, so in a few months from now. Can you give us an update on this matter? And what's happening with the finalization of all the reports for the candidates' refunds? Can you give us a comment on the level of observance for the 338 ridings? Have all candidates completed the process with respect to the rules set out by Elections Canada? Well, I can answer some of your questions, but not all of them. With respect to that, we have some 1,800 candidates, and that's more or less normal, but the ceilings were more or less double. What we are doing is to determine effectively for 2017 what the situation was. We've almost finished now. There might be a few campaigns left that have to give us some documents, but essentially we have just about finished. We are discussing some 8 campaign instances in terms of the refunds. There are some that could owe us money under the terms of the Act. A candidate has to have 15% of the votes for qualification. So we are looking at this, and we are recovering the amounts that were overpaid. of the 408 candidates that received too many contributions, we have some 338 that we have to recover funds from. But we will complete this certainly soon, and the rest of the campaigns just demonstrated marginal instances. But we are approaching the end of our study. Okay. Now, with respect to the legislative changes that are underway and going to be passed in the House, have you provided for any supplementary expenditures for the adoption of these changes and for changes that might come along at some time in the future, in the coming year or so? We hope that they will be put in place before the 2019 election. Have you got the funding you need to address these changes? Well, this is certainly an excellent question. We obviously don't know the extent of the various bills. There are 3 of them, I believe, that have been sponsored by the government, but we do want to ensure that we have the resources necessary for the changes that are in this legislation. Over the course of the summer, we will continue the work that we have already undertaken, and I must say that there are some needs that exist currently. Because of certain factors. We haven't had an increase in resources since 2008. We've got 38 new ridings that we have to serve and the legislative changes that are being proposed. So there is some pressure, of course, but we hope to be able to respond to them. As we see the extent of the change, we will have a better idea of the additional funding that will be necessary, and then we'll make a submission to Treasury Board at that time. Let me now turn to something that has attracted my attention for the program 2017-2018 in terms of electoral participation. What does that mean, electoral participation? But I see an increase of $500,000 for 2017-2018 that appears here. So some $8.7 million is what it represents, if my figures are correct. So what can you say to explain this? And what does election participation mean? I'm going to ask my colleague, Mr. St. Pierre, to answer your question. Thank you very much. The variances that you have flagged are due to a certain number of projects that we have undertaken. In terms of the language itself, there are projects, activities that are time limited but will be undertaken. So there are activities and projects that will be there but time limited. We have the work of the committee itself here and other activities that will involve civic education and a program for that. So this is the type of thing that is reflected. It's a collection of very small expenditures, but there's not one large expenditure. There's not one large item.
We would move now to Ms. Tassi for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Perot, for your testimony today and excellent in responding to the questions. I just have one area of questioning that I'd like to focus on, and that's the youth vote. So, and you mentioned in your testimony, you know, the importance of getting younger people at least on notice and then and on the record and then following up and getting them to vote. I had the amazing experience when I voted this time around, voting on a campus that was located in my riding. And it was, I thought it was, I take it was a pilot project, and it was very easy. It made it, it encouraged students on campus to be aware that an election was on. There was a lot of education going on in the campus itself. So I think it was just a fantastic experience all around in terms of student awareness, engagement. So my question relates to moving forward on this particular pilot that was run. So just to have your comments on how successful you felt they were. I'm not quite certain how many of these pilots were run across the country. The cost, whether it was cost prohibitive or whether you felt that the cost is justified, and is it moving forward? Is there any plan to have this sort of be a regular course, so it's no longer a pilot but turns into just a regular routine that we're going to have for elections?
Absolutely. I think in terms of the success, we cannot look only at the participation rate. I think you make the very valid point that it was not just a voting opportunity, it was an engagement opportunity. We do know based on our research that voters who vote early will tend to continue voting for the rest of their lives. And so beyond the actual numbers, and the number of voters was 70,000 voters, the price of the pilot was $2.6 million. So if you look at it at a ratio of voter per dollar, it's a significant expense. But I don't think that this is how it should be measured. I have the same view when you look at pre-registration of youth. Should we have that ability, at some point we will have programs going into the schools to pre-register young Canadians. That opportunity should not be looked at merely from the point of view of how many young Canadians we get on the register, but also how many we get to engage and talk about the electoral process and its importance. So I think we have to look at it in a more global way. And we do intend to expand the campus opportunities at the next election. As I indicated, we would have satellite offices also outside of campuses for Canadians who may be outside of their district. But we certainly will continue to have them on the campus for the next election.
Can you, that's fantastic, and I agree completely with everything that you've said. Can you give me a number? How many campus stations were there across the country?
There were 40 campuses and friendship centers. There were mostly campuses. I think it's something like the vast majority were campuses, and we would be looking to expand that where possible.
Do you have any idea of the number that you are looking to expand it to?
Not at this point. For the most part of the last elections, those that we engaged were responsive. Those institutions were responsive. There were a few cases where it was a challenge for various reasons. So we'll try again next time. But we'll be happy to come back with some numbers when we're further ahead in our planning. And
the ones that were implemented this time, will they also be implemented next time? Or you mentioned that there were some challenges. Maybe some of those will be excluded?
I'm not aware of any institution where we would not repeat the experience.
Okay, very good. Okay, those are all my questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We do have some time for a second round, at least a portion of. So I'll start that second round with Mr. Reid. You did have a shorter round. I'll give you. Well, I was going to shorten them, but I think I'll just go with a full 5 minutes here and give you that, and then we can see where we are. So.
Okay, thank you. So just, Mr. Perreault, based on your response last time, I want to confirm this is your position. Is it Election Canada's position that under the Elections Act, as it is presently worded, it would be unlawful for any person to assist a political party in defraying the cost of litigation against Elections Canada? It would be unlawful. Okay.
It would be a contribution. Whether it's unlawful or not depends on the amount of the contribution. Right, but any amount of money provided to a party to support any of its ongoing expenses, not specifically litigation expenses, to support any of the party's expenses and activities would be a contribution under the current regime.
Okay, thank you. I just wonder if you're aware of the implication of this, which means that for any party without millions of dollars in its war chest, based on the $2 million cost of that previous round of litigation, this actually means that Elections Canada can, at its own sole discretion, put any political party into bankruptcy.
Mr. Chair, I would maybe hesitate to adopt the assumption that is underlying that question, which is that Elections Canada would be intending to do that. I understand, however, very well the pressure, the financial pressure that exists on parties, and that would be amplified in the case of expensive litigation. I think it's an important issue. I certainly share your concern. I do think we have to look at the broader picture and consider whether it is appropriate for significant amounts of money to be provided to a party, whether those amounts should be completely unregulated or whether there may be a different set of rules that apply. I think that is something that maybe warrants some consideration. I don't know that the answer to the question is the policy answer to the question is a complete deregulation. There may be ways to calibrate the response.
Right. Well, no, I appreciate that. First of all, I want to be very clear that I do not mean to suggest that either you or Elections Canada, and certainly not Mr. Mayron, had that intention. I merely am drawing your attention and that of the committee to the fact that this is just the situation as it stands if the law is interpreted as it is. So that's very helpful. And actually, that was all I wanted to have on that topic. I did have two other things I wanted to ask you on completely different topics. One is this. The minister has promised to provide 2 additional pieces of legislation in addition to Bill C-33. Obviously, you've indicated you'd like to have this legislation dealt with and enacted by spring 2018. If you had to rank the importance of these pieces of legislation in terms of which ones you need to deal with most urgently, given the follow-through that you have to do, would you rank? I'm thinking most obviously of the electoral fundraising legislation versus the C-33 and the other piece of legislation not yet introduced that will capture other aspects of your report on the 42nd election. What priority would you suggest be given to them from the point of view of your own implementation issues?
I must say I find that question a bit difficult to answer, not having seen the contents of the legislation, and in particular the CO Implementation Act, Recommendations Implementation Act. Clearly, any legislation that involves significant technology would require some time for implementation and for testing. So in terms of the fundraising piece of legislation, it does involve some changes to the system. That's something that can be done, I think, within the period of 6 to 12 months. I'd have to get back to you on that. And so it's not clear to me at this point which is a priority, but we do need time when we fix our systems to make sure that they're running properly.
Thank you very much. I do have just 30 seconds here, so I'll just ask this question. And I know you can't give a response to us right now. It's more of an invitation. The minister's mandate letter emphasized the importance of cybersecurity. We just had recently an example of what may become something we'll see frequently in the future, cyber attacks on various systems. We saw how effective they can be if launched in the short run and just creating chaos. So you obviously can't answer now, but if you could get back to us in the future with your thoughts on how best to deal with this from an elections point of view, we would be most grateful.
We have been in the past, and we continue to work with the Communications Security Establishment. They provide the standards that are appropriate for our services, and we rely on their expertise in terms of the level of security. It's our job to make sure that those standards are met, and so we are quite happy to have the benefit of that collaboration. And this is something that we are currently working on, and we are making sure that our system responds to those standards or meet those standards.
Okay. Thank you. So the time has expired there. The next round would have been a Liberal round. I understand there's no more questions from the Liberal Party. We are approaching about 10-2. We do have some votes to dispose of course, and we would have to suspend briefly to be able to move to the committee business. So unless I had anyone who just had something that was burning for just a couple of minutes that they wanted to raise, I could allow that. And then we would have to, at that point, we'll have to move to our votes. So I did see Mr. Dussault, your hand did raise. I'll give you 2 minutes, so just keep it brief.
Très bref, par rapport au...
Very briefly. With respect to the new technologies that you want to put in place for the election services, for these advanced polls that you were talking about, is it a propitious time to move ahead with this? In the recent by-elections, can you tell me if any of these new technological advancements have been applied? Is there something that could indicate that this would be helpful in particular, and what does this represent in terms of costs? You speak of iPads. What's that going to cost to buy these iPads? How are you going to manage all this? First of all, in terms of testing the systems, we are going to want to do so extensively before we put them in the polling stations. And we will have laboratory simulations, that's for sure. If we have the opportunity, we will certainly seize the opportunity to test them out in a by-election. But we do work with different jurisdictions that are presently introducing this type of technology. I attended last week the election in BC, where at certain advanced polls and in certain regular polling day polls, they used this type of technology. I was struck by the fact that the people who worked there were really at ease using this new technology. There were people that were retirement age, and yet they were very much at ease using this type of technology, iPads. So in Ontario, in about a year's time, there will be a general election, and they will be a new opportunity to use this type of technology. So there's a great deal of opportunity that will be there for us to see how it works. As to costs, well, if you look at advanced polls, we would be talking about 6 and 6.8 million people who vote in the advanced polls, and about 30 million for the workers that would be there. So according to the scenarios that will arise, we are of course going to be able to refine our figures as we move along in the future and develop our technology.
Before I dismiss our witnesses and then we'll suspend to move in camera, we do have some votes to dispose of, so I will put those questions now. So I'll ask, shall vote 1 under House of Commons, less the amount granted in interim supply, carry? Agreed. On division. Shall vote 1 under Parliamentary Protective Service, less the amount granted in interim supply, carry? On division. Okay. Shall vote 1 under Office of the Chief Electoral Officer, less the amount granted in interim supply, carry? On division. And shall I report the votes of the main estimates to the House? Agreed. Okay. All right. Thank you for that. And what I will now do is I can dismiss our witnesses. Thank you very much for your statements and the answers to the questions from members. I can dismiss the witnesses, and we will suspend briefly to move in camera for our committee business. So meeting suspended.